Something that comes to my mind is from like how buildings, like for example, we take hospitals. So another thing that hospitals, in terms of accessibility, what they do is they have large lifts, they have ramps that helps people access and go through the building. And one more thing they do in terms of inclusivity, so how they make hospitals inclusive, like the building is, use large print signages and documents for people with visual impairments. Then they have assistive technology such as, wheelchairs and walkers for people with mobility impairments. So here, like we said, accessible is wheelchairs, but they also, a wheelchair does not only mean it is for someone who does not have a limb. It can also be temporary or situational. It could be for someone who's gotten a fracture or something like that. Then they also offer like food options for people who have dietary restrictions. So these kind of things also come into inclusivity, where you're thinking on a broader spectrum and not just focused on accessibility. And moving on, so from what we've gone through above, one understanding we get is that if we talk about digital interfaces specifically, inclusive design has to cater to like a diverse range of users, making sure that everyone can interact with the product and service regardless of their abilities. So, like we said, accessibility focuses on the permanent issues, and inclusive focuses on the permanent as well as temporary and situational disabilities. So, with this, I'd like to highlight just some principles that we could keep in mind when designing inclusively for digital interfaces. So, the first point being providing a comparable experience, it could be so that people could accomplish tasks in a way that suits their needs without undermining the quality of the content. So what this means is, whether out of circumstance, choice, or just context, people are diverse, right? And as people use different approaches and tools to read and operate interfaces, what the interface offers each user should be comparable in terms of its value, quality, and efficiency. So, like we saw in the Last of Us example, the game, they made sure that the interface provides a comparable experience where everyone accomplishes the similar task, but in a way that suits their needs, and it's not excluding anyone. So it caters to their own experience of it. Moving on to, considering situations. So, people use an interface in different situations, like they could be in a different situation every time. So, uh, some people are first time users, some people are more established users, some people are at work, some people are at home, some are on the move, and some are under pressure. So all these kind of situations can have an impact on how a person, interacts with the product or service. So for those who already find interaction challenging, such as those with disabilities, this may impact, usage particularly. So here we get to understand the environment they're in. And like, so for example, it's a noisy environment. So we have noise cancellation features, like if they're in a dark environment, we have light mode. And like we've spoken before, like if a person is blind, you have voice command options. And at the same time, a person can have temporary sight issues. So we have things like font sizes that can be introduced. Moving forward, so another point I'd like to talk about is being consistent. So, use of familiar conventions and apply them. So that would mean, familiar interfaces borrow from well-established patterns, right? So these should be used consistently within our interfaces to, like, reinforce their meaning and purpose. So this can be applied through its functionality, its behavior, its editorial, and its presentation. So that could be maybe content wise, we could use less jargons, plain language, maybe give text alternatives, our heading sizes like we discussed above, the buttons, and follow some of the general rules that we follow for digital platforms. Then moving on to giving control. So again, ensure that people are in control and are able to access and interact the content in their preferred way, like we discussed above as well. So do not suppress or disable the ability to change, standard browser platforms, or like their orientation, their sizes, zoom, contrast. So to avoid changes that we have not been initiated by the user unless they have a way to control it. So if we talk about a digital product here, one example that comes to my mind could be, avoiding infinite scrolling, especially like if the user is navigating through a desktop, because they can't really get past the stream of refreshing the content. So that's why we have something like a load more option. Some because what happens is another option could be, avoid parallax scrolling and animations, because again, like I discussed, they could feel nauseous and people could have vertigo issues. So this is one thing that we had in the example of the Last of Us game, where they gave options that you could slow down the gameplay speed, and you could turn off motion blur. Next. Yes, going on to our next point, which is offering choice. So offering choice simply means, there are different ways for people to complete tasks, especially those that are complex and non-standard. So what this would mean is that, there's often more than one way to complete any task. You cannot assume what someone's preferred way might be. So by providing alternative layout and task completion, you offer choices to suit them and their circumstances at that time. So this is something common we saw again in Headspace as an example, and in Last of Us, where you provide users with multiple options. Like, the context I would like to talk about here is again font and input method specifically. So you could, this is very common in games where you give options to people where they could connect their keyboard, they can connect their joystick, they could use some touch screen device, or they could connect their controllers. Like, you can even connect your controller to your laptop and play a game. And then another option could be, providing alternative text for images. So this allows like visually impaired people to understand content of the images. And
or
moving
an
on
audio
to,
option.
yes, or an audio option. Moving on to prioritizing our content. So focus on core tasks and features. So a site or application, may provide lots of information and functionality, but people should be able to focus on one thing at a time. So they get to identify the core purpose of the interface and the content and the features needed to fulfill that purpose. So example could be, a website can progressively reveal information and features with content and visuals and everything in one go, but that becomes very confusing for the user. And I'd like to give a good example in terms of our email. So how they do it is, you have a compose button which is present on all the screens, and then that gives you the early focus, and then you have inbox, which is prioritized over list of emails like spam and sent. So one more example would be in cases of form filling, like applications where people tend to put a lot of text and you need to fill in information. Either you can take the important information and rest can be auto generated. For example, like we have, like, you can put in your Aadhaar card number, and some of the other details can be filled in by itself. Moving on. And at the end, coming to the common end goal, which is adding value. Features should, add value to the user's experience by providing efficient and diverse ways uh, to interact with the content. So consider device features such as we discussed, like, voice, geolocation, camera, and vibration. We have APIs, and how integration with connected devices or second screen could provide a choice. So one example that comes to my mind again for this would be Siri in our iPhone. Like, everyone must be aware, like, you can ask it questions. It comes very handy. You can no, it is very handy for people not just with permanent disabilities, but also for temporary and situational issues. Like, you can tell it to call people, you can just talk to it and get some information, play some music. There is so much that you can do with it.